So we've been training our people, retraining our agencies to actually use the tools at less than perfect.
Everything is the worst that it's going to be right now, and it'll get better every day. The biggest thing is like change management with our teams too. You've got to think about, a group of people who have done very, very well, thank you very much, right? Doing the thing that they have been doing for years, and how to get people to believe that this is not only going to be better for the business, but it's going to be better for them.
I was just listening to Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. That word, pressure, is repeated 10 times in that song. It's a lot of pressure. It's also a pretty accurate description of the modern CMO role. Pressure from AI, pressure from regulation, pressure to prove growth, while earning trust in a more skeptical world. Hi, I'm Josh Spanier, VP of AI and Marketing Strategy at Google, and welcome back to Frontier CMO. Today's guest knows a thing or two about operating under pressure. Carla Hassan is the Chief Marketing Officer of JPMorganChase, leading more than 3,000 marketers across one of the most recognized and important brands in the world. From growing up displaced by war, to leading marketing across the Middle East and Africa at PepsiCo, to now shaping one of the most valuable financial brands in the world, Carla has built her career on navigating complexity and finding clarity inside it. In this conversation, we unpack how to build trust in an era of institutional skepticism, how AI doesn't fix broken systems, it forces you to confront them, and why resilience and operational discipline are now core leadership traits for CMOs. If you're feeling the pressure, this episode is for you. Here is my conversation with Carla Hassan. I've got a whole bunch of questions about the future of marketing and frontier marketing, but I've noticed a resilience in your career, Carla. You have faced many obstacles, moments of crises, and significant things. And on your Wikipedia page, it says you are a refugee from Lebanon. What does it mean to be a refugee today, and how that sort of impacted your growth, your career, and your ability to navigate these strange times we're all living in?
Growing up in the UAE as someone who, whose family left Lebanon because it was wartime. Like, the reality is my parents would not have left Lebanon if it had not been in the middle of a civil war, but felt like they had to extract their family from there into a foreign country and build a life for us. And, I was always struck by that. I always remembered my parents yelling into their phone to the people on the other end in Lebanon, like, asking how they were worried, sick about them, sometimes the line just cutting out. And I'd always, wonder, like, why are they yelling? I always remember the sort of longing for going back home and the longing to be proud to be Lebanese. And so that has always stuck with me, and frankly has really shaped who I am, not just as a person, but more importantly, I think, as a leader, staying really, really, really true to yourself. And there was a moment in time where I was lost with that, because I didn't want people to know kind of what my background was, because I was afraid. I was afraid that people didn't like Arabs, and that I'd be branded a totally different way. And so, I always talk about how I pass. No one knows that I'm from somewhere else, or that, I think in Arabic or whatever, or that I grew up somewhere else. No one knows that, because they don't have to, not by the way I talk, and certainly not by the way I talk. But it has really kind of shaped who I am, like really making sure that I'm proud of my culture and proud of my heritage. And I think I take that a lot. It is about resilience there, because, kids are, even when they're funny, sometimes they're mean and they don't realize they're mean, right? So like, they'd say, "What's your last name?" And I'd say Zach, which is my maiden name, and people would like spit it out. And it's like, how do I belong to a group of people that I don't necessarily organically belong to? How do I, find a way to survive it?
Well, thank you for telling us about that. I was just thinking and relating this to sort of a marketing area. Inside of Google, we have constantly struggled with being a global brand, and then operating at an regional level, and then at the country level. And, we have the GRL as one of our acronyms, and we constantly debate getting the balance right. You were a CMO of PepsiCo for the Middle East and Africa. You're a global CMO now. I was just wondering, as you run a large marketing organization today and you operate globally, you have to think locally. How do you take some of those things you've learned, some of that resilience, and actually get that balance right between global, regional, and local activations in marketing?
I'd say first and foremost, whether you are a local marketer or a global marketer or beyond marketing, if you're a local leader and a global leader, both, by the way, in the sense of geography, local and global, but also in the sense of like running narrow but deep businesses, or like, not as, not as deep, but like really broad organizations, right? Like global organizations. I would say that in all of those, for me, listening and learning is really, really important. And so to your point, when I was CMO for Middle East Africa region in Pepsi, I had to know the difference between the Saudi consumer and the Egyptian consumer and the Jordanian consumer. And they're very, very different. We had to learn what mattered to them, what made people tick, how culture shaped their choices, because to your point, what works in one country might totally miss the mark in another. And so I think as a marketer and as a leader, you've got to stay curious, you've got to stay open. And, at the same time, when you're in a global role, you're thinking about the bigger picture. And sometimes it is important to solve for the lowest common denominator because it's more efficient and it makes it easier. However, you've got to balance that. I mean, for me, we've got to make sure the brand's purpose and values are clear and consistent everywhere. We've got to make sure that the tonality of how we talk to our consumers and our clients is the same. But we also have to be flexible enough to know that like some of those things might need to be tweaked a little bit to be relevant locally. I learned pretty quickly that you can't just drop in with a global playbook and expect it to work. I'll give you an example. When I was at PepsiCo, we had a new tagline for brand Pepsi. It was, as the sort of head of marketing for brand Pepsi, it was like, no, we got to get this tagline everywhere, in English, everywhere. And once you start talking to the teams, you realize that actually even the translation from English to a different language, you can't necessarily translate word for word. And so, but you can in some cases translate the idea and the feeling. The net of it all is you've got to build relationships with local teams. You've got to trust their expertise. You've got to give them the freedom to adapt for their markets, but you have to have a very clear framework of what are things that are completely non-negotiable.
So what are your 3 or 4 absolute non-negotiables?
I think one non-negotiable is what the brand stands for, right? Like, so we live too much in a global world that, someone, one part of the world is going to see something else about the brand in another. The other is non-negotiables are about the tonality and the voice of the brand and the visual identity of the brand. So, I mean, if you take Google, right, there are things that you can play with, but like, Google is Google, no matter where you are around the world. It's the same as Chase, right? We have Chase International in the UK right now. And there are certain nuances in the creative or in the marketing that are for the UK market. But the colors of the brand, the essence of the brand, the tonality of the brand, the voice of the brand, all has to be consistent.
Well, I am a Chase customer, so I see some of that as I'm sort of a global person. I just want to go at one touch deeper here. Money is incredibly personal, right? And it must have incredible nuance between what people in the UK, people in the US, even across the US think and sort of connect with their financial services provider. And I just talk a little bit about the different culture of money in different parts of the world and how that expresses itself.
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? Like I'll tell you, for example, in some parts of the world, people don't talk about money. In the US, people talk freely about money, and people talk freely about learning about money, and people talk freely about like financial empowerment and understanding money more. In other parts of the world, they may not. And so you have to really nuance sort of how you're talking to them, right? So a message about savings, in one country might be have like a slight nuance to another.
It feels like with money meaning so many different things and so many different audiences, how do you get a consistent brand purpose for Chase, which actually speaks to those different audiences and the different approaches they have to money in the first place? How do you operate globally like this?
I'm going to take it in two, because one, we think about our firm's purpose, and everything kind of emanates from our firm's purpose into the two brands that we have, JPMorgan and Chase. Right. And so we think about JPMorganChase, the sort of corporate entity. We've done a lot of work to understand what is our role in the world? Why do we exist? If we were not here, what would people miss? And I think that's really, really important. And where we have landed is that we talk about making dreams possible for everyone, everywhere, every day. And the idea, this notion that if you are an immigrant and you are looking to open your first small business, we help make that possible for you. If you're two founders and you're sitting in your garage and you decide that now all of a sudden you have this really big company, you decide you want to IPO the company, who would you trust to make that dream possible for you? And then also our own people, 320,000 people, right? How do we make their dreams possible? There's so many things they want to accomplish in life. And so this idea of making dreams possible is really important for us as a firm. And it's grounded in the values that we have as a firm as well. But that, I would say broadly, is how we think about Chase.
Okay, so I sense a tension here. So I'm going to ask you about it. JPMorganChase is the world's largest bank, or one of them. It is the richest bank by assets under investment. Your CEO is famous. And so I'm just interested in sort of the tension between, from a marketing perspective, how do you build a brand which is the most successful, richest, broadest, and all that, against a backdrop of people don't like or trust large institutions as much?
The trust isn't earned in a tagline. It's, to me, earned when you show up in the moments that matter for consumers. So helping a family save for college, guiding a first-time home buyer, supporting someone rebuilding their credit, day in and day out. The differentiator is that it starts at the top of the house for us, and then it becomes a framework that helps people make the right decisions, that ensures that we're innovating and talking about the right things. And so there's the example of the work that we have done over the last 5 to 10 years with Detroit. And so since 2019, I believe, we've invested $200 million to help accelerate the city's economic recovery. And I think it's just the day in and day out, living in the communities and working with the communities, that builds that trust.
It makes perfect sense. We see the same thing in Google. And I see the data against sort of institutions. At broad level, people rail against the institution, but they like the person close to them. So the local branch, I can understand that. Your local insurance person is great. The insurance industry is problematic. So there's this weird dichotomy that we as marketers have to understand.
People just want transparency. They just want the real deal, And so when you're transparent, when you're trustworthy, I think, people will also, by the way, I think the other thing is, I think people sometimes, if you're building that trust with folks, to your point, whether it's right across the street or your neighbor or whatever, or feeling like we're in their community, then when the inevitable happens, which is this small hiccup, people will forgive you for it, right? People build relationships with brands just like they do with people. I always tell my team, brands are living, breathing things. Every day we're evolving as brands as well. And so I think that, just the ability to just be honest and transparent when you make mistakes, but then be there for people when you to really solve problems for them, I think is important.
Everything we've talked about up to now feels and sounds in a good way like classical marketing, like the things you probably were taught when you were at PepsiCo right in the beginning of your career through to today. And there's a bunch of stuff as marketers I think we need to keep. I'm also really interested in what we need to change, what needs to evolve, where the edges are. And I'd love to get your thoughts. I asked Gary Vee on an earlier episode of Frontier CMO to talk about Liquid Death he's an investor in, and how they've done this brilliant sort of breakthrough innovative marketing. But then how do you apply that to the banking sector? And I'd love to hear from you, what does modern marketing mean today? Where are the boundaries changing? What are you learning? What are you trying? And what's not even working?
Here's the dichotomy, right? Which is when we talk about modern marketing, because there are so many things that have changed, and yet there are also so many things that will stand the test of time. And so for me, what stands the test of time is that you've got to know who you are and you've got to know who you're not. And I think that's really important. By the way, Gary is a prime example of knowing exactly who he is. I tell him that all the time. You know exactly who you are. And that's what's incredible. You know what you're going to get from Gary. And that is why people are drawn to him. What has changed is so much. I go back to when I first started, and the, quote, technology was 4 stations on a television. And then I remember the conversation about like, we've got these things called digital banners on the interweb, and
Crazy.
what are we going to do with those, and then you go from there to like, now where we are, which is you think about how consumers are actually getting their information. And you think about even something like a Google Gemini or AI mode in Google, and like how people are going on and asking questions and getting the entire answer. And so the disruption is happening all over the place. And so that has changed dramatically how people are getting their information. Social media, right? Even social media has changed dramatically. And now we're moving into a space where like e-commerce is now a huge part of social media. Now live shopping is growing in social media. Now people, at least from a financial services perspective, 1 in 3 Gen Zers are getting their financial services advice on social media. And so as a marketer start to think about that entire cohort of people, it's not just about the technology, it's about how the technology is shaping their behavior. And so as marketers, we've really got to think long and hard, not just about, how we used to do it, obviously, but like all the things that are changing. I think we've got to be nimble, way, way, way more nimble. Like, again, gone are the days of where we'll like test something for an entire year to see if it works. Like now you're putting it out there. If it works that day, you amplify it more. If it doesn't, walk away. The only last thing I tell you that I think is changing dramatically, other than, all the stuff we just talked about, is I think that as important as the digital life is to a consumer, they are craving in-person experiences. We are seeing it more than ever. Like almost 80% of consumers are telling us that they are craving in-person experiences because they're lonely. So all these things that are changing, but the most interesting one to me is that as deeper as people go in digital, they're also trying to fight it with experience. And I think the two are figuring out how they live together.
So I've heard you talk about how you've partially restructured your own marketing teams and you've sort of created new roles for editors and prompters. Just talk a little bit about how you're adapting the team.
We talk a lot about AI changing everything and AI replacing jobs. And of course, it absolutely will. But the example that I usually give, and I'll give it even in just how our media team thinks about even old school terminology now, search engine optimization, but, writing the articles and like that, all the stuff that is driving our authoritative content. And again, historically, you've had X number of people, and those people are writing those articles. That is their job. They are writers. Today, those people are editors. And we have seen an increase, an efficiency of 30% so far. We're going to get more, but we're still in the beginning stages of it. We've also seen our ability to double the content that we're producing because of the tools that we're using from an AI perspective. Now, interestingly enough, what I will tell you is it's an absolute journey. I think there's a lot of folks, and this is where I think as marketers we go wrong, is I think there's a lot of folks that go, oh, here's a tool. I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to like hit go and it's going to be perfect. It's much harder in the very beginning because we're learning. And so it wasn't until there was like a moment in time where the team's like, oh, now we got it, right? Like now we are understanding how to prompt it better. Now it is learning, our language, and it's like the model is actually learning how we want it to respond. And that's when it unlocks the true productivity. And I will tell you that the teams themselves feel like their work is a little bit more meaningful because now it's not like, I'm just writing. Now I'm actually strategically thinking about what are things people might be asking for. Less about just writing an article about like, what's the best travel credit card?
When you say teams there, how has the work shifted inside of your teams with your external agency partners? Is that been going through a transformation?
It is going through a transformation for sure. We brought a lot of the capabilities in-house years ago. And so it's less about how it's changing with our agencies right now.
Right.
And it's much more about the roles that we brought in-house years ago. We have almost like a hybrid right now where we are, we test things against each other to make sure like the way that we did it before, we know that works. The way that we want to move to, we're not quite sure. Let's test it. against each other. And what we're finding in almost every instance is that with minor tweaks, the new thing that we want to go to and the new workflow and the way that we want to do it is actually just as good, if not better. And so I think it also helps our agency partners to know we're leaning into that innovation and they're starting to bring more of it to us, where before they probably wouldn't, right? Because they just assume that we're going to be too conservative on it.
So one of the things is it's also incredibly frustrating as a marketer right now because the systems architecture, the overall tools and systems that are being built, they're not mature. One of the things we really got to and really sort of started to understand, it sounds like you're doing the same, is you have to use the tools. Because if you wait for perfection, by the time perfection comes around, you don't have the muscle memory and you haven't been to the gym to work out how to do this stuff so you can really get going. So when we had Nano Banana launch in the US and around the world, we had spent 9 months trying to make object permanence, hacking our way through to that. It was painful, difficult, and frustrating. Nano Banana comes out, instant object permanence. And in one regard, all that work up to that point was a waste of time, but it wasn't, because it was like the equivalent of going to the gym and actually getting skilled at that. And so we've been training our people, retraining our agencies to actually use the tools at less than perfect.
Everything is the worst that it's going to be right now, and it'll get better every day. The biggest thing is like change management with our teams too. You've got to think about, a group of people who have done very, very well, thank you very much, right? Doing the thing that they have been doing for years, and how to get people to believe that this is not only going to, be better for the business, but it's going to be better for them. You have to feel it. It's funny, not AI related, but get made fun of a lot for how much I am on social media, and like my behavior on social media would have you think that I'm a 16-year-old. I'm sure if you ask Gemini, how old is Carla Hassan, based on her social media footprint, it would tell you she's like 16 to 18. But I do it because that is where our consumers are. And so it does take time. And I think that's where, marketers don't think enough about it. Like, it takes time, and it takes everybody at least having some sort of knowledge of the programs and the platforms that we are using with hands on keyboard. Otherwise, it's just another thing that's sitting over here that's going to stay in proof of concept forever.
We're in violent agreement. It's one of the things we've seen inside of our own large marketing organization. But the leaders who are actually trying things out themselves actually can then talk and push their own teams to work in those spaces. It feels like it's a mandatory now if you're a marketer. So I've seen some of your YouTube films and some of your TikToks. And how did you feel the first time you pressed upload on one of your little TikTok dances?
Oh God, how do I feel every time I hit upload on anything on social media that I do? I'm like, I brace myself, I started off doing them with my daughter, so they were more fun, like it was like,
right.
Oh, I'm connecting with my daughter during COVID, wink, wink. But I do kind of hold my breath every time. But there's a purpose to a lot of them. Like, I just uploaded one last week because somebody that is like near and dear to my heart was going through some stuff. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be silly. I'm going to post this dance that has a subliminal message, and she's going to get it. And, whatever.
I think being a marketer today means kind of unlearning some of the things that we have learned, and the speed at which social media works, the way I can post to YouTube Shorts or post to TikTok and get instant reaction. Until you actually do it, you somehow don't internalize it. So you unlearn the conventions of marketing, which are typically in months and quarters versus hours, days, and weeks. And we have to move that way.
That, it's very interesting going back to, not Carla the person, but when you talk about YouTube Shorts, for example, right? Like, I said earlier that there's some content that we create that we test before we put it out in the world. And there's some that, that we don't. There's a lot actually that we don't. But the best focus group is actually putting it out into the world. And so we have examples of content that we have created that we have put up on YouTube. And immediately you start to see reaction. You start to see people share. You start to see people comment. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is really great. To your point, if you as a marketer personally even don't understand that dynamic, if you can put something out there and it can get 30,000, views in about 5 seconds, versus you're going to put something out there and it's going to get 100 views in 10 days. The insight that you can glean from that as a marketer is incredible. And I think that the more you are in it personally, the more you understand how it works and the more you can see how you can apply it to your brands as well as a marketer. One of the things that we have spent a lot of time on in my marketing organization is process, because I do think that what ends up happening, particularly when something novel has come to the world and something new, I think that people immediately go, oh, let's take, that thing and let's put it here on the current process that we have. And one of the things we are realizing in the marketing organization is that putting AI on a crappy process is a crappy process with AI. Like really, like it's the crappy process that's now AI enabled, as opposed to looking end to end at our processes. And we have spent, you can imagine how many processes we have. Google's no different, right? Like, I talked to Lorraine, you guys are a large organization as well that has been very successful through a lot of legacy processes. And trying to look at those processes end to end and identify in a campaign execution, everything from strategy to content generation to, audience building to measurement, ultimately, all of that. We are totally relooking at all of those processes. It's not sexy. It is completely like menial work. But we've got to do it because we now are overlaying all the different processes as we've looked at the process map and said, where does a human need to be involved? Where does a human not need to be involved? So we are literally using this opportunity with Gen AI as being an enabler for the things that we want to do, to take an entire new look across the board at our processes end to end and saying, how do we shake all of that up and then overlay the tools that we need, whether, by the way, Gen AI or not, to be able to drive the new process that we want.
I'm sure every marketer out there is going through a similar sort of process. And I think the pace of technology such as this now a continuous optimization. One of the macro things that I think I'm seeing and speaking to a lot of CMOs and a lot of organizations and Google itself is almost a rebundling. When you can move as fast as you can, when AI does speed up the process, the notion of the separation of creative, of media, of design, of social, of comms actually becomes kind of a distraction and not helpful. And I'm just wondering whether you're seeing that trend towards some sort of rebundling of bringing people together is happening for you.
100%. I just actually had that conversation with someone today. This idea that you hand off something to someone else and then they come up with a media plan creative that you have created. I mean, we were already starting to say, how do we think about integrated briefs when we're talking about all of the work that we're doing, even internal briefing, if you will. It is going to be interesting to see how org design shakes out from this, because we have subject matter experts, right? And so how does that all work together? Should certain things be reporting to certain things? Should they not? I don't know the answer to the question.
It comes up again and again in my conversations. Like how are you structured? How are you paying for the work that you're getting from your agencies and pricing internally as well? And then who's doing it? This is a massive thing going on under the hood of marketing right now. I think there's going to be a lot of focus and conversation on solving this.
I talk about this a lot too, in the idea that organizations are not static. Brands are like humans. They need to change and move. But again, you're talking about people. And if you think about just human nature, I come to work and I do X, Y, Z, A, B, C.
Yep.
I do it really damn well. And now you're going to tell me that I have to do it a different way. Okay. And now you're going to tell me that you're not actually quite sure how I'm going to interact with other people, or if this thing that is a function today may not be a function tomorrow. So as marketing leaders, we're going to have to really dig deep and start having those conversations. And particularly, like you said, there's lots of us that have brought a lot of stuff in-house. We're bringing a lot of creative in-house. We've brought a lot of media buying in-house, brought a lot of stuff in-house. So you actually even have to figure it out in-house, because now you have creative and media and other, centers of excellence that are providing, if you will, services, right?
Let me give you one prediction that I'm seeing, and then maybe you could suggest a trend or something without being absolutely definitive that you're seeing from all of this. But one of the things we're looking at and really seeing is the notion of creating product pods, local pods, people who are deeply integrated with our business leadership, supported by a truly scaled AI-enhanced system. So the idea is you get the best of these sort of local level. I need someone to talk to brainstorm with, to understand the customer and to be close to my product. They need to be supercharged by a distributed, globally scaled team. And so brand and performance completely goes away. You really have strategy, insights, and sort of connections planning and creative all right there in the product with the product leads. But they then partner with a globally scaled team. And I think it's a sort of new org design for marketing that I'm kind of interested in. We're exploring inside of Google.
It's an interesting question because my first reaction, actually, almost what I want to tell you is, oh, I have that, but I don't have it. I don't think to the nuance that you were talking about. What we do have is we've got a chief brand officer. Her team is a group of folks that are building content for different lines of businesses, which you could almost argue are what you're talking about, product.
Yeah.
And that not every line of business has their own brand teams and their own creative teams and their own media teams, but that it's much more sort of centralized, working on behalf of all the different quote products / lines of businesses. That we have like that, but I don't think that's actually what you're talking about.
If I use a restaurant analogy, you go to a restaurant, you sit down and you have a waiter. And in a good restaurant, you're a regular. They know who you are. They know what you like. They can recommend what's really good today. They've got insight into everything that's coming out of the kitchen. That waiter turns around, that single person, and basically hands over to the short order chef who has a giant team using, in our analogy, AI and generative AI at scale to basically produce the thing that will make the perfect meal. Again, not fully baked, we're just talking out loud here, but that's where I feel like some of the world is going, because you can move so fast and you can do so much at scale, but you still need the insight and that interface and proximity to the customer, both internal and external, to make it happen.
That I definitely agree with. I agree wholeheartedly with your last point, right? Like, I think you still have to have the people that understand deeply the product, understand deeply the customer.
I have two more general topics I just want to ask you about. We talk about creators, and often people think of YouTube and Mr. Beast and that sort of stuff, but you've been working with my two favorite creators for the last 4 or 5 years and the last 10 years, the Acquired podcast, which I think is just a brilliant move on your part. For those that don't know, Acquired is a truly brilliant business sort of history podcast, and JPMorgan has been the sort of lead sponsor of it for 4 years, 5 years. Talk a little bit about finding the creators that are right for you as a bank, and then how that partnership has developed. It's ended up in some pretty interesting places.
That partnership actually started in our JPMorgan payments business, and any one of those partnerships with creators, especially, we think about, is it going to be relevant? Like, is it going to feel like we just kind of stuck our name to someone or some people? Or is it going to actually feel like it's going to be additive for them, that it's going to be additive for us? We really wanted to establish ourselves a few years ago as a business that was leaning into innovation, that was thinking differently than all of our competition, that was really about like driving innovative solutions. And there are two ways you can do that, right? You can spend all the money in the world to talk about how you're doing that, or you can partner with people who actually are. And so that's actually how the Acquired partnership came about. I hate to use the word property when I'm talking about Acquired, but like, you're using a brand like Acquired that actually people pay attention to. People wait to listen.
I interviewed Colin and Spanier, who are the sort of the preeminent creator experts on YouTube and beyond. And they spoke a lot about the partnering with creators and helping them see their vision through, but also becoming a character in the creator's universe. And it feels like that's what you've achieved with your partnership here.
No, it's really interesting. That's actually where I was going to go next. You have to allow them to be who they are, right? So, any creator you're working with, one of the reasons that you go partner with that creator and why they're interesting to you as a brand is because they've done something really interesting, really relevant, and they've built their own brand. And so the worst thing that we could have done is gone and partnered with acquired and asked them to and JP Morganized acquired versus doing it the opposite way where we are saying, we want to partner with you. Here's what our business objectives are. Here's what your business objectives are. Let's just make sure that they are in sync. And if they are, then go.
The reason why they're successful, the reason why creators are successful is they speak their mind. And they say, honestly, whether the business strategy, the ideas, whether leaders are doing good things. And what did it take to get your leadership to understand that inside of Chase, that you don't get to dictate what these people say, and they may talk about us sometimes less than the way we'd want?
So you would not be surprised to hear that there is a lot of vetting and there's a lot of risk management when it comes to anyone that we are partnering with. So there is a framework. We've got a risk framework that we go through, whether it's a creator that we're working with, someone that we're asking to speak on our behalf, even someone that's showing up to speak at one of our events. And everybody is clear from, the top of the house on down that we're in the risk management business. And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong, but always we are deliberate and about how we are making the decision.
Well, great marketers, and I'm sure this is what you've been doing, have been bringing along their stakeholders. In the same way you have to be able to speak the language of the CFO, you need to be able to speak the language of the chief legal officer. And when you bring them inside and they start understanding what's happening and what the risks potentially are versus that's part of being a good marketer today. It's such a cross-functional thing.
I agree, Josh. And here's the thing that I would say, historically, we kind of, as marketers, we positioned ourselves as the, we are the only innovative ones and we are the only ones that are going to do interesting, cool, break trap up stuff, The reality is actually that as the head of marketing for this brand, I am equally as responsible for safety of the brand, for, trust in the brand, all the things that we just talked about when we first started. And I can't deposition our legal partners and our compliance partners as the only people that care about that. And so as such, they are not as, quote, good or cool as I am. That's a way to totally alienate your partners. The reality is that we are all in this together. And if we look at ourselves as business people that are all thinking about the same business outcomes, then it becomes much easier to have the conversation collectively and take the risk collectively about the things that we want to do. And so your point about you equally as a marketer today have to have a point of view that is not just about marketing, but you have to understand, how the company makes money. You have to understand, product language. You have to even be, proficient enough to be dangerous from a technology perspective, knowing that that's not your domain. You've just got to have empathy and put yourself in the shoes of other people that are working with you to say, where are they coming from?
There is a cost to making Chase a media seller with the questions around data and what you're actually giving to the marketplace, which feels at odds with the trust capital that you have built up over many, many, many decades as a brand, as a bank. So just talk about that.
So I think first and foremost, I would tell you that no matter what, consumers' private information is always first and foremost at the top of what we do. So there's no selling of data, et cetera, et cetera. I can assure you that. At the end of the day, we have almost 90 million customers, right? And I think for us, we've always been sort of I would say an ecosystem that thinks about how to give consumers what they want. And so Chase Media Solutions, the reason that we're excited about is it really kind of created, use the word new rails, right? New rails, new methods to enable the connection that I'm talking about, right? So you want to talk about consumers who want to be connected to, brands that they, believe are a part of their life. And so for us, the idea that we have partners, and that, consumers want to be a part of those, of those partners, the mission is really kind of to bring those two things together.
I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire signal or noise. So is this a signal or is this a noise? First party data is the only data that matters. Signal or noise?
Always. I don't think it's the only part. I don't think it's only data that matters. I think there's a ton more data. I think it's like one of the most important data that matters because, of course, I'm a marketer who plays it with first party data and has the privilege of having first party data. But I will tell you that like there are data that we can find. I mean, social media gives us data and insights all the time. There's plenty of other data that matters.
Speed matters more than craft, signal or noise.
Always.
I would agree. CMOs need to become technologists, signal or noise.
I think it's noise. I don't think they need to become technologists, but I think they need to, kind of what we talked about earlier, they need to understand it enough. They need to be curious about it. They need to learn about it and not just be spectators.
CMOs all need to do TikTok dances.
Signal, baby.
All right. Signal. I like it. This has been great. Thank you so much for the time.
Well, thank you so much. You guys have a great
Carla.
Before we wrap, I want to leave you with 3 takeaways to take into your week. Think of these as your field notes from the frontier. First, you don't build trust with a tagline. Carla said it plainly, and she's right. Trust isn't earned in the campaign, it's earned in the moments that follow. In an era where institutions are scrutinized, marketing doesn't manufacture trust, it reflects whether the organization deserves it. Second, AI doesn't fix broken systems, it exposes them. Putting AI on top of a bad process just gives you a bad process faster. The real opportunity isn't tool adoption, it's redesign. End-to-end workflows, clear roles, humans where judgment matters, technology where scale matters. Transformation is operational, not ornamental. Third, global brands win locally. All life is local. The strongest organizations are uncompromising about what the brand stands for. Purpose, voice, identity, and flexible about how it shows up market by market, zip code by zip code. Consistency builds equity. Relevance builds connection. You need both. Thank you for joining us. For research, case studies, and tools to help you lead in this era, visit thinkwithgoogle.com. It's where we track the signals, cut through the noise, and share what leaders are building in real time. We'll be back next episode with another leader operating at the frontier. Until then, stay sharp, stay resilient, and stay out in front.